Hello everyone, my name is Shaylin Sullivan. I am the speech language pathologist for Martin County Hospital District, and this is the All About Dementia series. We have it broken up into 6 different parts. I would love to see all of you at one of the live meetings, but if you're unable to make it on any of those dates or at that time, I will be posting online at the end of the week after each meeting, where I will post all of the content from that part, as well as address any questions and answers from the live meeting. Also at the bottom of the screen you have my email address and direct phone number. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me using either of those methods, because I am a resource for you. So please feel free to reach out with any questions. All right, let's get started. So what is dementia? Dementia is the loss of cognitive function as the result of damage, infection, or disease in the brain. And as you see here, I have listed all of the different areas that are considered part of cognitive function. So it is far more than just memory. There are several different types of dementia. The word dementia is an umbrella term that describes the characteristics or the symptoms of different disease processes or different acute medical conditions, and we'll go over all of those in more detail in just a minute. But just to touch on a few of the different types of dementia, these are progressive disease processes. We have the frontotemporal dementia, Alzheimer's disease, which is of course the most popular of all of the different types of dementia. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, vascular dementia, Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, and Lewy body dementia. So this is just to show you a visualization to show you that there are many different types of diseases that are a type of dementia. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so in order for me to talk to you about dementia, I feel like it's important to have a basic understanding of the brain, okay? So we'll try not to get too much in the mud with all of this, but we'll start out by just describing the parts of the brain. So the human brain has an outer portion, or what's called the cortex. Now this is your gray matter, or the gray wrinkly stuff that you see in pictures on TV, things like that. So in your outer brain, or your cortex, you have it divided into 5 different lobes, and each of those 5 lobes has 2 hemispheres, a right and a left hemisphere. So we have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and the cerebellum. And like I said, right and left hemispheres of each of these lobes. Now the important thing to note here is each of the lobes and each hemisphere of each lobes have different jobs and responsibilities. And so a lot of people ask me where in the brain is memory located? And the answer is all over. The brain works in perfect concert most of the time to accomplish thousands of different thought processes, movement patterns, and it usually takes several different lobes and hemispheres communicating with each other to accomplish each task. So your frontal lobe is, and we won't go too much detail, but is mostly responsible for your executive function. So executive function is your higher level thinking skills, planning, organization, decision making, personality. All of that is going on in the frontal lobes. Your parietal lobe, for instance, is responsible for sensory and motor processing and mostly body mapping, which memory plays a huge role in, because it's how your brain helps your body move through space based on recalled maps. So if you are moving through a room, you can do it with your eyes closed or with your eyes open, because your brain remembers the different objects in the way, where the walls are, where the doors are, where the window is, things like that. So that's an example of body mapping, and how your brain helps your body move through space without, being injured or running into anything. Your temporal lobes have a huge role in memory as well as language, and orientation to time, and also forming and storing memories and kind of committing things to long-term memory. So that's your temporal lobes. Your occipital lobe is known as your visual cortex. This is where everything that you see is processed, which obviously plays a huge part in memory, because you see things, it's sent to the visual cortex, and then you have a memory. If you see somebody's face, obviously facial recognition is based on the visual cortex and memory associated with remembering what someone looks like, or remembering what an object looks like. And then we have our cerebellum, which is your little mini brain down there, and it plays a huge role in coordinated movements and motor praxis. Motor praxis is movement recipes. So different stored recipes for movement, so that your cortical brain doesn't have to be so voluntary for everything. You don't have to make a plan for every movement or sequence of movements that your body makes, because your cerebellum helps store these motor praxes, which is movement recipes. And that way, when you say, I'm going to brush my teeth, well, then we just pull up the motor praxis, and the brain sends out all the signals to grab the toothbrush, do the toothpaste, and we're brushing our teeth. So that's just an example of that. So then we have what's called the inner brain, or the subcortex, or the midbrain, or this is also referred to as the more primitive brain. And inside the subcortex region, you have a couple of different systems that are a group of structures that are also responsible for many different jobs. Your limbic system has a lot going on. It includes the thalamus, the hypothalamus, hippocampus, and amygdala. Now, all of these structures have their own job. The thalamus is known as your sensory relay station, so it is helping direct and process sensory information collected from your body, from your periphery. That's the term that we use. And then you have your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is a lot with has a lot to do with regulating your sleep cycle, your hunger, impulses, different things like that. Your hippocampus, plays a huge role in making new memories, and it works closely with the amygdala. The amygdala has a lot to do with emotional impulse control. It also has a lot to do with memory, because it kind of tells you whether or not to have an emotional reaction to certain stimuli. So if you have, it tells you if it's in control of your fight or flight mechanism. Your hippocampus and your amygdala work together to kind of know whether you're in imminent danger, if something is a threat. So if you see a threatening object or image, or you recall a traumatic event, then that's the part of the brain that regulates the emotional response associated with different stimuli: smell, sight, sounds, memories, things like that. So then we have the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia are a group of structures that are primarily work together to work on voluntary and involuntary motor control, sensory and motor control. So your voluntary movements, your involuntary movements, your reflexive movements. They all work together to make sure everything works nice and smooth together. So let's move on here. So I tell you all of that to show you that your brain is more than just, it's a very complex organ. Each different little part have millions of different jobs, and so you can't really describe dementia or a memory defect. Dementia is so much more than the loss of memory. It is a disruption in all of these systems that are going on in the brain. So let's get into a little bit more here. All right. So now let's talk about dementia specific. So because I say dementia is the loss of cognitive function due to brain injury, infection, or disease, there obviously can be reversible dementias, or what may be referred to as delirium. So these are temporary cognitive declines that are a symptom of another medical condition, an acute medical condition that can be treated or cured. And then you see there, we have the acronym that just gives a couple of examples of disruptions in cognitive function that can be restored back to normal or baseline. So, drugs or intoxication, this can cause an altered mental state, an altered cognitive function that when the substance is metabolized out, then cognitive function returns back to baseline. Emotional, depression, anxiety, psychiatric events, all of those things cause an altered cognitive function, and then it can be restored back to baseline when the emotional condition is treated and resolved. And all of those go through there. I won't go through each of them, but it's just to show you that these are temporary conditions that cause a reversible dementia or delirium. So just so that you're familiar with those terms. All right, so now we're going to talk about irreversible dementias, which is where you have a disease process or injury process that is actually changing the anatomy of the brain, causing irreversible damage. And in most of these cases, the loss of brain cells, brain tissue, and so we're going to go over these just as an introductory. I'll go into more detail in later parts. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, and it is a very predictable disease process. It is a very well studied disease process. There's still much that we don't know about Alzheimer's disease, but there is a lot that we do know. Alzheimer's disease is caused by a couple of different proteins that cause a pathological overproduction. So in Alzheimer's disease, you have a couple of different commonly known causes for the changes in the brain, and it is plaques and tangles that are caused by an overproduction or pathological production of these two different proteins. So when you have these plaques present in the brain and the tangles, then the plaques and tangles are what cause what's called neuronal death, or the death of brain cells and causing the overall atrophy or the loss of tissue in the brain. Next we have frontotemporal dementia. There are 3 different types of this dementia, and it all depends on if you have or where in the brain it is primarily present. So in frontotemporal dementia, you also have plaques that cause the tissue death or the neuronal death. And depending on where the focus of the disease is, depends on what this type of dementia looks like. So if it's more present in the frontal lobes of the brain, then this is where you get more of what's called a behavioral frontotemporal dementia. So you see more behavioral characteristics, so the loss of impulse control, big changes in personality. Whereas if it's more towards the back of the frontal lobe and into the temporal lobes, then that's where you get more of a non-fluent primary progressive aphasia, because this is more the language, expressive language center of the brain. And so whenever the disease is more focused in the temporal lobes or the back part of the frontal lobe as well, then that's where you get more of an aphasia characteristic, meaning the loss of language. So then we have a vascular dementia, which is caused by multiple vascular events or poor blood supply due to a vascular condition. So this can be multiple strokes, this can be multiple brain injuries, this can be poor blood supply due to arterial sclerosis or occlusion, anything that keeps the brain from getting the proper amount of blood flow and thus the proper amount of oxygen can lead to the neuronal death and a dementia process due to multiple cerebral injuries. Next, we have Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's dementia. So a lot of people are unaware that there is a dementia process associated with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is primarily known for its motor disruption. So a lot of people are aware of a lot of involuntary movements and or motor issues. But Parkinson's disease is a progressive process, a degenerative disease process, and it does primarily begin in the motor portions of the brain, specifically the basal ganglia that we talked about earlier. So it does affect, initially it affects voluntary and involuntary muscle control. However, the disease does progress into the other portions of the brain, causing cognitive disruption or a dementia process. Now, these are the type of dementia that is involved in Parkinson's disease is a Lewy body type dementia. Now, you can have Lewy body dementia separate from Parkinson's disease, or you can have Parkinson's disease with Lewy body dementia. I know that's a little bit confusing, but Lewy bodies are a specific type of protein deposits in the brain. So it causes the plaques, the protein plaques, to cause, to gunk up the brain, for lack of a better term, and cause the neuronal death. The hallmark characteristics of Lewy body dementia is the diminished cognition and hallucinations. Lewy body dementia does affect the occipital lobes and as well as the temporal lobes, so it can actually cause visual and auditory hallucinations as part of that process. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a variant of mad cow disease, and it is a very rapidly occurring and very rapidly spreading process. This disease is not associated with any kind of foodborne illness the way that your typical mad cow is, born in undercooked meat or diseased meat. That's how one form of mad cow, but this is a similar disease process that is not related to the type that is transmitted through foodborne illness or anything like that. This is a very rare type of dementia process, and it, from start to finish, it is about 12 months. So pretty much by the time you start to have symptoms and realize what's going on, it's very rapidly ending after that. Next, we have Huntington's disease, also known as Huntington's chorea. Chorea means like a rhythmic movement, and a hallmark of Huntington's disease is the big choreic movement, which is involuntary muscle movement. So a lot of times you get big arm movements and big leg movements that almost look like a dance of sorts. And so that's where that gets its name. Huntington's disease is a form of dementia because it is a disease process in the brain where you have plaques and tangles and neuronal death in a very predictable, progressive, degenerative pattern. And this specific type of dementia disease process is a genetic neurodegenerative disease. So it is passed on almost with certainty. So if your mother or father had Huntington's disease, you have a very high chance of also having Huntington's disease. They can do genetic testing to see if you will. And then symptoms onset around 35 years old, and it's 15 to 20 years until death after that point. And then next we have Wernicke's encephalopathy or Korsakoff syndrome, which is the alcoholic dementia. So this is the disease process, and it does become a degenerative disease process. This isn't like just staying drunk, but the constant state of intoxication and the chemical process that is involved in your brain when you are intoxicated causes a degenerative process, and this is known as Korsakoff syndrome or Wernicke's encephalopathy. And it's where you see a degeneration of cells and neuronal death in a patterned way that is set off by continued repeated alcoholic intoxication. So that is the completion of part 1. These are all the different types of dementia, and in next week we will talk about the diagnostic process, and I will go into a little more depth about all of these different types of disease processes when I talk about the diagnostic process and what you need to do to get a dementia diagnosis and why that is important. Thank you so much for coming, and please send me any questions you might have.